So we are now at a point in the agenda where we are going to talk about the functional model. Let me give you a little bit of preparation for how we're going to go through the steps. I thought it might be good just to kind of give an overview of the workflow process, so that way you could understand, make sure that we're all on the same page at least, in terms of how the work product went through the different stage gates and where we stand at this moment. Because there may be a lot of dialogue, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page around, we are going to invoke the 3-minute rule. You saw me ask Sitharama to stop asking questions because he kind of went over that 3 minutes. So thank you all for being understanding, but we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. We'll be paying close attention to the online traffic and try to make sure that your comments are presented in a timely manner so that it's can be added into the conversation versus an afterthought. So we'll be paying very close attention to those of you online as well. We do have quorum. The way that that is calculated is 20% of the last plenary. So we have made quorum, and so we have those counts if anybody needs to have that level of detail. So let's start first with the workflow slide. Oh, I didn't finish my points. So after I finish that piece of it, then we're going to have the security committee, the creators of that functional model document. They're going to come and present. And then after the presentation of the functional model, we do have some amendments to discuss, and then we'll actually do a vote. Okay. And you all may see that we are actually watching some of the documents come up this time. And if you recall, on Wednesday when we started the plenary opened with an accidental coffee spill. And the coffee spill has prevented us from having more than one. So we usually have a staging spot for our documents, and then we have the display spot. And we don't have that ability, but the flexibility that John has had in the back has been amazing to keep things moving smoothly. So I'm sorry that we have to show you some of the work in the back. And actually, do you have the slide that is the workflow slide? I don't know if Mary Ellen got that to you.
Model and we have the security.
It's neither one of those.
The interaction model and the functional model.
No, I'm sorry.
Solar flare, actually.
About a half hour ago. I'll just talk you through it. Let me just pull up my, give me 1 second, sorry.
Don't have a VGA? I've got a USB to VGA.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, my laptop does not have a VGA thing.
I got you.
Do you? I'll have to invest in one of these. I've been carrying an HDMI cable some places. Okay, so I'm sure you probably can't read any of this, but just trust me on this. Okay, so we had some slides that were created. It's a larger deck around the workflow discussions, because there are, as with any organization that's looking at their processes, we need to make some enhancements to the workflow. Let me see if I can actually take this out and make it like, so we can zoom in maybe. I see a bunch of people squinting, and I don't want to be the cause of you having eye strain. Click on where? I did. Did that help? Okay. So let's try to walk through this to make sure everybody understands the processes that have taken place. So in this situation for the functional model, the originating committee is the security committee. And once the work product has been completed and approved by that committee, it has to go through the steps of going to the privacy committee. And so the privacy committee actually had two spots in it, one where they did they produced their privacy review report and gave feedback, and then there was an actual vote by the privacy committee to take it to the next step. The management council also had a time to review the functional model and then give any feedback. And the thing about the management council is they're representing the different stakeholder groups. So the management council then also reviewed the functional model document and voted as well. Those steps happened prior to the plenary receiving the document. Once the plenary receives the document, then we have reading processes. So it was really important that we had to get the document posted onto or available to the plenary for a 15-day reading period. Today is the 15th day. So we have, that is a requirement. Then we need to also be able to accept comments. The comment time period is actually set by the plenary chair. And so I made the comment time period end on 9/11 because I wanted to give the security committee enough time to be able to take those comments and figure out what they needed to do to make necessary changes. And so for the past week, they have offered those that provided commentary, whether it be a minority report, which was produced and was also posted onto our website, comments from the healthcare committee. All of those have had to have additional conversations or offerings to be able to present to the security committee. So now we're at the phase where we are going to present this to the plenary for actual approval. So all of you should have had a chance to review the functional model document. If you have not had a chance to, just due to your time schedule to do that, they are, again, available online, either via the agenda, there's a link, or in our documents repository, there's a link, there's the actual document there. But we're going to now have an actual presentation that kind of summarizes all the elements of the functional model. And then, again, we'll present the amendments that you all have not seen prior to today, and then ask for a vote. So I think that Sitharama is going to be the one that is going to actually do the presentation. Adam Madeline is online, but we thought it would be a little easier to have an in-person presentation.
Hi, Kim. Can you hear me? This is Adam.
We can hear you very well.
Okay. Just confirming. Thanks.
How much do we have? How much time?
We have plenty of time.
Do you have time? You wanted to call the vote quickly?
Yeah, so the only time challenge that we have, because I want to make sure that we have enough time to have discussions, is that there are a few people who need to leave to catch flights. So if anyone needs to leave to catch flights but wants to vote, we can take your vote and then represent that at the time of the vote. So I just wanted I don't want to rush the conversation, understanding that we do have some time challenges with schedules. So take your time.
Thanks, Kim. As Kim indicated, Adam Madeline is online, so he will also be chiming in, as needed. But since I'm here in physical presence, I will be kind of like doing it initially. My name is Sitaram Durba. I'm the Vice Chair of the Security Committee. So, actually, this is the wrong presentation. Yep, that's the one. All right, thank you. So the intent of this presentation is to give an overview of the functional model document, right? I'm sure that many of you had the chance to go through it before, but I think this is a good opportunity to revisit it and kind of get an overview from the security committee itself. So why was the functional model created? I think the primary reason we wanted to do this was to baseline all the functions and the roles and responsibilities that happen in the ecosystem, right? I think it's such a baseline will give us a consistent interpretation of what's going on in the ecosystem. So as a result, what we have done is, so to bring that consistency, what we said is we actually need to define the operations, the functions, the roles, and the type of entities that participate in the ecosystem. And that's what is captured in the functional model document. You will see that when you look at the document, it kind of has the set of functions that we think have to be supported by the ecosystem. And then the functions are then mapped to the roles, and which role is expected to perform which type of function. That's at a high level is the crux of what's gone into the functional model document. So as a result of doing that exercise, I think we have some benefits, right? We can use that consistency, those definitions of the functions, the role and roles, to now start putting our requirements in context. So we say that, hey, this is a function that's being provided by an IDP, the role of an IDP. So what are the different requirements for that? I think it provides those placeholders, that easy reference for us to say what are all the types of requirements that we need to cover, we need to discuss, and then kind of tag them to the appropriate place in the ecosystem. Oops, wrong button. This probably is a kind of like a homework in the sense that that we just wanted to bring forth the assumptions that we had starting this work. The first assumption is that since the derivative work of this functional model document is going to be, at least the one of the derivatives is going to be the requirements activity, right? So I think that at some point we probably have to start looking at the requirements at each role, and each layer, activities at each layer. So that has been our goal to provide that facility, so that we can create the requirements at each and every layer. And I will cover the layers. I mean, what I mean by the layers slightly in later slides. But we are not going to be writing the requirements ourselves. The security committee itself is not going to write all the types of requirements, right? So you will, individual committees will actually take this work and then start filling in their requirements, whether it is a UX requirement, privacy requirement, or other requirements. Obviously, an entity will have multiple roles. We did not make an assumption that between a role and an entity there is a one-to-one mapping. I think there is a one-to-N mapping, obviously. So, for example, we talk about credential service providers and IDPs. Most of the times, these are the same entity. Maybe in terms of the workflow also, from a user perspective, you will see that it's the same entity that they are interacting with to get the credentials as well as the actual identity. All right. So this is what I was referring to in terms of layers, right? So you start with the activity of like, okay, let's define all the functions within the ecosystem, right? What are the different types of functions? So maybe that's the question to ask. And maybe what are the different, what is the hierarchy of functions, or what are the different layers of functions? So I think this picture captures the message that we want to send out as to how the ecosystem can look like in terms of how it functions. At the bottom, the core functions are provided. You have registration, credentialing, authentication, authorization. These are all the fundamental functions from a user perspective, at least, that the ecosystem provides. You will see on the right side of the bottom layer the roles which have been identified that are critical to the ecosystem. Like we have the users, identity providers, credential service providers, registration authorities, so on and so forth. The important thing, I think, to take away is that, again, I want to emphasize the consistency that this work is intended to provide to the rest of the work that's going on in IDESG, which is that whenever we talk about, whenever across any committee, that we talk about a particular activity or a particular role, I think it really will be good to refer back to this set and say, okay, so what are we talking about? Are we talking about registration? Are we talking about credentialing, and so on and so forth? So use those terms. Similarly, the same thing for roles. Like, so we are talking about an entity. Is it playing a identity provider role, or is it playing a credential services provider role, or some other role, right? So I just want to emphasize that we need to bring that consistency, use this document to bring that consistency into the rest of the work that we produce. So after the functional layers, the basic functional layers, we envisage that the ecosystem will have the administration and operation activities, right? So obviously we need that. Redress, recovery, enterprise governance, audit, policy development, obviously, and any updates. So we have identified some core activities that the ecosystem itself needs to provide to glue the fabric, so to speak, of the ecosystem. And obviously, to do all this, we have different entities, different roles, performing different types of activities. We need interoperability. We need standards, right? So there is an activity of like standards development, maybe specifications development, maybe it's not a development, but identification of the applicable specifications. And then, so to do those activities, we obviously need entities like standards development body, specifications development body, or interoperability providers. So these are the roles that we see as to providing those activities, the interoperability and standards activities. And on all these, we have the Uber framework of like the governance and accountability. So we have, we need policies in the ecosystem, rules and requirements, certification, accreditation, assessments, audits. And to perform those activities, we definitely need entities performing some roles, accreditation body, certification body, assessors, auditors, and the communities of interest, which probably perform one or more of these activities, governance and accountability activities. So at a very high level, I think this is the big picture of the functional model. I mean, this should probably convey the intent and the crux of the work that we have captured in this document. The rest of it is detailed.
Sitharama, if I might.
Yeah.
Just take us, I don't want to take any time here. I just want you to, folks, just to look at the title of that slide. I don't actually think it is, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't actually think it is the IDESG functional model. I think it's the ID ecosystem functional model as viewed by the IDESG.
Good observation, yes. Agreed. So having covered the main aspect of the functional model document of the work, As I said, the rest of the slides are essentially detailed, right? So let's talk a little about the functional layer itself. This is the foundation of the ecosystem, where we have the different actors performing different roles and providing the core operations or functions that obviously have to be provided by an identity ecosystem, right? The roles are, the operations again are like registration, credentialing, authentication, authorization, and transaction intermediation. So when you look at these functions, I think that these are intended to cover pretty much the gamut of the operations that the ecosystem wants to provide or wants to support. The rest of the activities that you will see, the higher layers, will be essentially targeting. When you look at, for example, standards and interoperability, right? They will essentially look at what are the standards required for authentication, what are the standards required for authorization, and so on and so forth. So this layer, the bottom layer, will essentially provide the context in which rest of the activities happen in the ecosystem. So I think it's crucial that we capture all the activities that happen in the ecosystem in this particular layer. The roles, again, I think I'll just be repeating if I read this, we already covered. But again, to emphasize, if we have, this layer, again, needs to capture the roles as completely as possible, right? So these are the fundamental roles provided from a user perspective, at least. When somebody wants to play a role in the ecosystem as a service provider, they are looking at this list. They will be providing one of these roles. Again, just like Colin did, if you have a question, please ask that question. Yeah. So what we have done is, you have an online question?
Yeah, there's an online question. Do users equal individuals as you're making these comments?
Good question. So we have been talking about users as person users or non-person users. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike? Right? Okay. So I don't think that when we say users, it's just person users. It can be person or non-person users.
Going back to the prior slide, I'm not sure how to look at this. I'm wondering, when you're saying these are the core operations of the ecosystem, would you include things along the lines of promotion of the ecosystem and education of people to know what it is, or is that's not to be included here? I'm not sure how to look at this.
Good point, good question. I think that's a clarification that we need to make. Personally, Mike or Adam can chime in if I'm not accurate in this, but the way I'm looking at this particular deliverable and this particular document is technical in nature, right? It's not going to be covering the marketing activities or promotion activities or any other thing. Those are not captured. This is just the technical aspects of the ecosystem. We have one more question.
Sitharama, this is Adam.
Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit, these operations are to represent the transactions of the ecosystem themselves. So they're significantly technical in nature, of course, but supporting activities that around marketing communications are not represented as part of the transaction or interaction itself, and that's the approach we've taken with the functional model. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Well, I think you're right in terms of this particular layer, right? There are aspects of like governance and accountability which probably are not specific to transactions per se, but they do cover the technical aspects, not the marketing or other governance activities. We have one more question here. Hi, Jim.
Jim Craig, Healthcare Working Group Secretary. Core operations, one item that I think should be there that's missing is measurement. There's everything that takes place there in the interaction crosses all the different boundaries. Needs to be some form of a measurement.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. It's also kind of like it exposes the need to kind of clarify this versus the other layers, right? So we said that we have different layers of the functions that the ecosystem provides. This particular layer, it's called functional layer, but these are the core functions, the core operations, right? Probably the clarification that is required here is that these are the operations from a user perspective, right? When somebody is performing an activity from a user perspective, what are the things that they need to do in the ecosystem? Now, if like other aspects like monitoring or accountability, they probably can be captured. They need to be captured, definitely, but they probably need to be captured at a higher level, at a different layer of this functional document than maybe this layer. We have a follow-up.
I would agree with you, captured at a higher level, but there's still has to be a core element to be measured that comes to the core, very foundation that moves upward. It transforms all the different layers at different times. But it has to be, there has to be a clock there somewhere that initiates the activity, because it's a process. When did it happen, at what time, when, by who, in an event? So that's why I said a measured function, and it is core. It is core to everything that takes place.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this layer? Okay. Moving ahead. So what is shown here is that obviously, we identified the core functions, right? I mean, registration, authentication, authorization, and so on and so forth. These are little abstract, a little high level. Probably there is need to divide those into further more granular elements, functional elements. And that's what we have done, is like to recognize that these operations, the core operations, need a little more clarity, a little more granularity in definition. So when you look at this picture, you can say that, hey, registration, we envisage that as part of registration, there are different functional elements that are involved. Not necessarily saying that these are involved every time in every type of registration, but we are recognizing this and we are defining them.
See, just for the avoidance of doubt, IDESG there should be ID ecosystem. The actual subtitle in the document's fine, but it's just on the slide.
Awesome. Yep. So if we don't have any questions, I'm just avoiding to, just talk to the slide in the sense that, we can read each and everything, but what you will see is that in the later slides, we did include high-level definitions of each step, each core operation. So we see that a registration is a process that establishes a digital identity for the purpose of issuing or associating a credential. A mouthful and a thoughtful definition, right? Anyway, so let me know if you have questions, but we included these definitions in the presentation just so that we have them on the slide deck if anybody wants to discuss them. All right. So we have a question somewhere? No. So I think this is where, to the previous question as to whether the users are intended to be only person users, we do see individuals probably are, they can be non-person entities. When we say NPE, it means non-person entity. They can be organizations, hardware, networks, software, anything that essentially can get a digital identity for itself. We obviously have, when we when we look at recognizing organizations, we give them a name, there is a record for them, and so on. So obviously they can get a digital identity also. Is there a question?
Okay, so my recommendation is going to be for the future. Finish the presentation and then ask questions. But
Okay.
because I think it'll make it easier to help you get through it. But here's the first, here's a question. It's from Mary Hodder, and she said, if users equal individuals, are we serving people here? Or is the functional model about the ecosystem? We have never done needs assessments for the ID ecosystem. I believe it started based on reactions to people complaining, to press reports, etc. But that's not how you get to the deeper needs of the users. That often they, the press, those that complain, can really articulate. I'm worried that we are making something and bolting on what individual needs at the end to conform to the system versus making something that works for individuals and then building a system around that.
Not sure I actually got the question. If the question was about the requirements from a user's perspective, then I think we can cover them. We already have. So again, just to reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning, is we want to use this as a reference, this document, the functional model document, as a reference to create requirements for different committees. So UX committee, for example, can take this document and say, okay, so we have a identity provider role performing registration and credentialing functions. What are the UX considerations for those things from a user's perspective?
Let me ask what might be a related question, but might also sort of, I think, help with the prior question. The functional model was the best approximation that the group could do of how it saw the ID ecosystem working. As you know, and so I think the comment or the question before was, have we captured everything? And so where this may come into play is that I assume the functional model, like the strategic plan, like the IDEF plan, is somewhat of a living document. As we develop new ideas of how the ecosystem will work, there will be revisions to the functional model, and that the functional model will then incorporate new functionality or new actors or new approaches that we weren't really thinking about as the functional model was being developed at the first point in time. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, just so that everybody is clear, right? This is version 1.0. This is not a final version, right? Frankly speaking, I mean, we did go through some reviews with the privacy committee and some other committees, but we actually are seeking feedback on this, and as much participation as possible is highly recommended, highly encouraged, right? So we are not saying that this is it, this is the final. Actually, to the contrary, what we are saying is that this, we think, is capturing the baseline to start with. This has captured as much as we can think of, so we can release it, because we are expecting this to be used to drive consistency in the other areas, right? But this is definitely a living document. Thanks. So I'm not going to read through the entire definitions again, right? Please. All right. So the next level, as I was saying previously on the high-level deck slide, is the administration and operations layer. So we obviously see that there's a set of activities that the ecosystem needs to provide from a user perspective, at least, again, redress, recovery, or governance, enterprise governance and policy development, auditing, service optimizations or updates. So these are the, there are definitions for each one of them. So this again we see as the kind of glue that we can provide to the service providers and the users within the ecosystem, so that it's not just the core functions that we focused on. We also thought about, hey, what happens if this event happens? What happens if user faces that problem, right? So obviously, this document is not listing all those things, all those variations and events, but we recognize that as an ecosystem, we need to provide those operations. And that's the goal of listing them here. All right. The interoperability layer probably is a more technical layer. I'm not so sure. It's required definitely in the technical fields, but maybe it is required in other fields also. Is essentially saying, if we have these operations being performed by different entities, how do we ensure that they are interoperable, right? So we obviously have to look at standards for the transactions that take place and other activities, different types of schemas and the messages that flow back and forth, or any other type of things that happen in the ecosystem that require standards across the board. So we probably have to, I'm not so sure actually, I think the first task for us will be to identify any existing specifications that already provide the interoperability for the different functions that we want in the ecosystem. If there is a need, then maybe we have to do the spec development, right? So the roles again are, I think to perform these activities, we definitely need some entities playing the roles of a standards development body, specifications development body, and the interoperability providers. Interoperability providers are seen as exchanges. So you probably have some exchanges in the ecosystem whose job is just to provide the interoperability between different standards. Mike, chime in if I'm saying anything wrong. All right. I think I just covered describing all these activities and roles. So the last one is the governance and accountability, right? So I think from the viewpoint of at least recognizing that any ecosystem needs to provide certain governance and accountability aspects to it, right? It's not going to be viable, it's not going to be long-term surviving if there is no such structure to it. And obviously we need bodies, we need some organizations, or we need a structure that provides this governance and accountability operations, right? So that's the crux of just identifying this layer and identifying the operations that can take place in this layer. We have, probably go to the next slide. The policy and rule development, right? Obviously, it talks about the IDE ecosystem policy and the rules of how to play in this ecosystem, right? Certification is a process where we either recognize external certifications or we have our own certification, but definitely there is an activity of certification within the ecosystem. Similarly, accreditation and some way of assessment. And to perform those activities, we think that these are the types of bodies that we require. Accreditation body, you're responsible for conducting the accreditation activities. Certification body for performing the certification activities. Assessors, entities that conduct assessment of participants in the framework. And the communities of interest, a group of entities that establish a trust framework. I think this is probably an important aspect as well, and important for a lot of people here is like, I think we need to recognize the communities of interest as a notion, as a role within the ecosystem, so that we have a clear path for different communities of interest to play and operate within the ecosystem. So that's probably what we had in terms of presentation on the functional model itself. Obviously, the document covers all these aspects in much more detail, but I'm here to answer any questions.
Sitaraman, could I say a few
Sure,
words?
sure.
Hi, everybody. This is Adam. Sitaraman, you did a great job there. I really appreciate it, covering all aspects of it. I just want to highlight a few related points. You know, as has been said, you know, this is not a perfect document, and we recognize that it's very much a living document, a work in process. And it was, you know, the product of a very dedicated team and significant effort, almost approaching over the last year, and has been socialized several times. And you know, we appreciate everybody's contributions and feedback we're receiving today. We will consider it going forward. You know, we're already talking about the next version of it, but we also believe very strongly that it serves a very important role, and it's critical, you know, to have this adopted by the plenary at this point. You know, as Sitarama has highlighted, you know, it has will help to move other work products forward, will help to bring some clarity and alignment on certain things, and help to facilitate, you know, the next phase and stage of the organization. So I just wanted to highlight and you know, personally thank everybody that's been committed to contributing this, to making this happen. And again, we look forward to, you know, continuing to improve it and make it the best it can be. But we do think and hope everybody sees that it's a very valuable contribution at this point and stage of the organization. And just want to thank everybody. That's what I wanted to say.
And a particular shout out for Mike Garcia.
So, Ian Glazer. So, as someone who spent 6 years building nothing but reference architectures, I applaud the effort because building reference architectures is a tough slog. Question, which is, you have communities of interest here in terms of governance and accountability layer. I'm curious if you thought about going forward with the functional model, a modular approach that would allow communities of interest to add other functional components. So, for example, if a community has a very specific need for, say, tokenization, just pick something at arbitrary, has to have tokenization, and it's not just a policy thing, we actually have to have it in infrastructure in multiple places. Have you considered a modular approach that would allow functional additions to the reference model for components that come from specific communities?
I will start with the initial answer, and maybe other folks, Adam or Mike or other people can chime in from the security committee. So there is a question of granularity, right? I think we have that question not just within this work or within this community, within this committee, but I think we have this looming question on all the committees, is like how deep do we get into when we perform any of these work items, like when we are working on any of these items. So tokenization, for example, maybe, I'm just taking tokenization in its just that sense, right? Specifically tokenization, maybe a little bit granular. I'm not so sure if it kind of percolates up to a higher level function that we can actually include in the functional model as like the ecosystem is performing this. Maybe it is, but I think that's a good question. In terms of like, what do we do from suggestions from other communities of interest? I think that's a very good point. Personally, I don't think we have spent enough time, unless Ryan or Mike have inputs.
Yeah, we hadn't really discussed the concept of modularity, but we had discussed the concept of how it interplays with the requirements. So your specific community might have a specific way you have to do some kind of one of these functions. So whether that's part of the authentication function or something like that, your community might say, this is how we for example, the healthcare community do this, and that might include tokenization.
Yep. Go ahead, Angela.
Hello again. First question, and I'm thinking of the functional model in light of the framework document that we were discussing earlier, and this is an open question. Do we think that the functional model is generic enough or executed at a high enough level that potential new activities that we've not yet foreseen fit within that functional model? That was the first question.
Do you want me to take that?
Sure, go ahead.
Absolutely. Okay. I think this goes back to the question we had earlier, is this a living document or is this final, right? I mean, so I think the answer again is this is definitely a living document, and we would really like to get more and more contributions from thoughts from other people to contribute to this.
Okay, fair enough. The second one is, I know this is a technical document, but the question I'm going to ask is, it's so intertwined, it's not a technical question, but it's so intertwined with this, and this is, you know, the organization has both a C3 and a C6 organization, and potentially if the mission is highly successful, you could have trade groups coming, not just a community of interest in this definition, but a community of interest in terms of a trade group coming in and say, I need you to do X for me to participate. And X includes other activities. And so I guess what I would say is, how would we look at that? And would we have independence issues in some of these certification these different bodies? Do we have governance in terms of independence of people who are making assessments and influencing the criteria that they're being evaluated upon? So it's just a thought.
So it's probably above my pay grade for this particular question, but
it's not a technical comment, but
yeah.
I can't pull it away from this.
Okay, so I will give my short answer, and then other people, if they want to chime in, please chime in. The way I see it is that, I mean, even though we recognize these things, I think they perform within the set of requirements that the committees come up with, right? It's not like, oh, this body by itself is going to make decisions. No, I don't think that's the case. So whatever is the form of IDESG in the future, where it still has all these committees, or maybe it just has 5 people sitting in a room, whatever it is, I think that as a IDESG, we are going to come up with new requirements or new ways of recognizing the certifications, whatever it is. So it's not going to be this particular body that's going to make the calls. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Andrew Hughes. I think an answer to the question about independence of certification, if I understand it correctly, that would be embedded in the processes that we develop to accredit and certify.
Okay.
The reference model itself does not include that process.
Okay,
it's a
fair
separate
enough.
process, which we have some initial work from the Trust Framework Committee on.
Fair enough. Last question, completely unrelated to this. If you could go to the process flow, that flow diagram.
Oh, the process flow. So
Was
is this a question for Kim?
It might be a question for Kim. Is this for later? If I saw step 2 or step 3, I'm trying to recall this off the top of my head, went through the privacy committee and then the management committee. My question is it passing through there? Is it that they're making initial comments, or if whatever that flow document is, or excuse me, whatever process is that's passing through has to be approved by that body? When it's, what does that mean? What is the criteria that can go to the next step?
Kim?
So it does have to be approved from the standpoint that the privacy committee may have recommendations for changes, and things may be iterative in nature in that spot. The management council approved the document without changes to bring forward to the plenary, who then had the ability to make any recommendations, but they made theirs subject to the approval of the privacy committee, because we actually ran these things in parallel almost at this point to make sure that we had enough time for the first reading. So there.
Privacy has the ability to shut anything up, something that comes through.
Privacy has had the ability to make recommendations for changes to make sure it passes the privacy process, and I will, Stuart, to add more comments to that.
Stuart Shapiro, I'm chair of the Privacy Committee. So I want to be clear about this. The Privacy Committee does not approve or disapprove work products. We approve or put out a privacy review report on a work product, and the work product can move forward without that privacy review, but we are not passing, you know, we don't exercise veto power over the work product per se. The way our workflows are set up, we produce a draft privacy review report after having evaluated the work product. We then provide the submitting committee with the draft of that review report to offer them the opportunity to make revisions based on any issues that were identified in the report. They make whatever revisions they care to make, and then, and this was what happened with the functional model, they then submit the revised version back to the Privacy Committee, and we go through it, and where revisions addressed any identified issues, then we in turn revise our findings as appropriate based on those revisions. We then have a final draft report, which then gets voted on by the Privacy Committee to approve it or disapprove it and make changes. So that was essentially what happened in the case of the functional model. And, I mean, this was the first time we actually have kind of done this from start to finish, and so it was a learning exercise for all of us. They submitted a version of the functional model. We evaluated it. We had identified a number of privacy issues. We wrote up the draft privacy review report. We gave it back to security. Security made some revisions based on the issues we identified, came back to us. We reviewed the changes, determined that they had addressed all of the issues that we had identified, and altered the report to indicate no privacy issues. That report then went before the full Privacy Committee and was voted on and was approved and was sent on to the Management Council and the plenary. So that's how it all works.
Sita Rama?
Hi.
I have some questions online.
Sure. Please state your name.
Sorry?
Please state your name.
Anne Rahuya Robin.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, Sita Rama. I'm going to try to make this quick and concise, but it doesn't always work out that way. Of course, I filed a minority report, so I have serious concerns about the functional model. And to be precise, I find that because there isn't an ethical center to it that is foregrounded, that or that's clear enough that this model has many of the aspects of a dystopia that is very unsettling. And that combined with the fact of what Jack said, Sue said, that all of you work very hard, no question about that. It's not a personal matter here. But he said, well, only 0.5% of individuals care about, how this thing works anyway, or something to that effect. That can't go unchallenged. We have no idea what individuals' points of view actually are, as Mary Hodder was trying to make that point. And that we have to do much, much better at listening to individuals' requirements, which clearly are not involved in this model at present. Lastly, because there was a minority report, and I'm not the only one who has this perspective, and I also have an alternate plan, which is to have some kind of agreement for social cooperation that would be present at the beginning of registration so that people have some way to evaluate if it's in their best interest to participate. I want to ask the very clear question of how can a minority stream coexist with this majority approach, or can, or are those among the plenary who, and we're not all in lockstep, no question about that, but who have a different approach? Do you want us to simply go away, or how can, these are very deeply thought out, with great conviction, opinions that if individuals knew that their attributes were monetizable and that that money was going to third parties, this would be a different picture that cannot go unsaid. So my question to the plenary, to you, how can this minority perspective, if it is bad at the moment, I concede that it may very well be, but how can it be kept alive within this organization? Thank you.
Hi, Ann. This is Kim. If you remember at the beginning of my words, I also announced that there wasn't a minority report that was posted, along with other feedback that has gone on. And so the next slide that Sitharama, you were going to have at the very end does have all of their summaries around all of the comments and their disposition of those comments. So I think that I'm going to hold off until he gets to that last slide, and then I think we can revisit the question. But I want to make sure that the committee has a chance to actually give formal response back to each of those items.
Okay, so we will revisit it then?
Yes, and there is there is a statement that they have for each item, including the minority report. Just for everyone's knowledge, I guess.
That's a little different, though. I'm asking for a more actionable way forward. So I know we can have comment and you comment back, but is this a lockstep kind of, we've all got to agree to this functional model, or is there actually room for another approach?
So there are actually two things.
We can come back to it, but that, to be precise, that's my question.
So there's actually two things regarding the functional model specifically. One thing is that, again, there's going to be comments on the minority report. The second thing is that we are seeking a consensus vote, or a consensus, so there does not have to be complete lockstep, only a consensus in that part. I think that the comments and the recommendations that you have absolutely should be heard, and a decision made as to how those comments are to be utilized. But the reason why I'm asking to wait until the comments from the security committee, because I think that'll put it in context of what we're talking about, just the functional model component.
I just want to make one more observation here. I probably am not going to be, a favorite because of what I'm saying here, but I think that we have to, in terms of like our contributions, right? I think we are part of a lot of committees, and hopefully, we are not going to be, too focused on too many committees, but we want to contribute to some specific committees, right? And I think that as we are participating in those committees, I think it's our responsibility to bring up the issues that we want to see addressed in a timely fashion as part of working in that committee. And I think that the work that gets out of the committees is a collaboration effort that comes out. So I think I just want to emphasize the timeliness of bringing out individual concerns. We have a question here. Tom.
Tom Sullivan, Chair of the Healthcare Committee Working Group. I think this discussion we've had in the last few minutes is important, and it's helping me understand as this organization matures, what are the protocols for having the entire IDESG vote on a work product, as opposed to the Security Committee, which owned the work product in the first place. But once it comes to the floor of the plenary, I think the ownership changes. So once you take a vote to approve, add amendments, do whatever, disapprove, I think the work product is owned by the plenary. That's the way I understand it, so correct me if I'm wrong. So for instance, when I hear someone get up and say, what if a community of interest feels that tokenization is very important, how do you deal with that? And then the response is, we will consider that. And then I say, well, if the work product gets voted on by the plenary, it's no longer owned by an individual committee, and it's the plenary and the leadership, the management council and the board, that decides how to dispense with the amendments and the other considerations. And, you know, in the organizations, many organizations I'm involved with, the leadership would say, well, we'll refer this one back to the security committee or the, but it's the leadership that decides what will be considered and where to refer it. So I just want to make sure, is that the correct understanding of how we're working, or?
Kim, I will let you go first, but I have a comment on that.
So I think you're absolutely right in terms of once we've gotten past the consensus process and that it is now owned by the, and now the actual work product has been approved, it does become a work product of the entire organization, of the plenary, and not just the security committee. But they may be the ones that are continuing to make modifications to it as need be. And this is not and this is our very first formal work product. And and as Kathy pointed out, there were questions about the actual workflow. How do we make things smoother? So as we kind of work through all of those, we'll have much more clarity around it. But again, remember, this is our first work product. And so we may have a few hiccups, but absolutely, I think that the spirit of what you're saying, Dr. Tom, is exactly what we're trying to have, that it does become owned by the plenary itself, but the actual work still may be done by a specific committee.
Yep. No, you covered it. Hey, Jim.
See, the Jamie Clark from Oasis. It will help, I think, all of us, if I may be so bold, to remember that we're approaching trying to create something that's much bigger than ourselves and that is attractive to and makes intuitive sense to a whole lot of other players beyond anybody that we've ever met or maybe even thought of in the IDESG so far. So this is always going to be an iterative process, and I just wanted to check this with you. My understanding is essentially by approving this, we're doing two things. One, and I believe it will be approved. I think it's a great piece of work. One is we're adopting that model so that a lot of the other stuff we're building has a tree structure to hang things off of. We are acquiring a much better shared vocabulary so as to be able to make some of our other stuff connect. And that's probably why it's one of the first things out of the box. Second, we're also going to be essentially taking this out to the broader community, including people who would never be here or who are in other industries that don't think about what we're doing, and saying, okay, we've taken a first cut. We think it's pretty good and it's ready for prime time, but now throw your use cases against this. See if this correctly expresses what you're doing in the wild in places we would never otherwise encounter, and come back to us and tell us. If you can break the model with some reality, bring it on, and then it will go for other iterations. But I mean, we're always going to have to somehow find in our leadership and in our plans for publishing this thing afterwards and doing further versions, we're always going to have to find that note of humility that says, this is our best shot, we want feedback, it's okay if you break the toy, we'll make it better, and we're always going to be open to more ideas in the future.
Absolutely.
Are we on the same?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I cannot reiterate it enough that this is a work in progress. And as I mentioned in the beginning, if we start using this work to drive consistency in the rest of the deliverables, we will definitely find gaps. We might say that, the credential service provider, it's never used. We don't really need them, right? Or we can say, oh, I really need this particular role that's not there in the functional model. I'm not able to document my use case because, I just don't know what is the right term for the role that I want, right?
Without getting into a lot of detail about it this time, because it's not relevant to the vote, which is what we're discussing, it will be interesting to hear later from a public outward-reaching communication point of view, sort of how we take these approved work products out on the road and use them for a further feedback loop and ask for even broader future iteration. But that's, as I say, that's next step.
Yep. Thank you. Any other questions? Sorry.
So do you
Sure. So what I have covered so far is what has been sent out to the plenary for review and comment and vote. What I'm going to show in the last slide is a change that we are proposing to the document, right? And this change is based on the feedback that we have received thus far. We have been receiving feedback on the functional document, and we have been capturing those things, and sometimes we said, yes, we will come to that, but not in version 1.0, but we will definitely cover those aspects in version 2.0, right, or some other version. I think what we have not done is explicitly pull those items into the document itself so that everybody is aware that, yes, these are the ones that are slated for consideration, for discussion after 1.0, right? So what this is showing is all the items that thus far we know, which have been brought to us, that we need to start considering after 1.0 once we are done with this approval process. So the first one is accountability. Just to give a background on this, we have been discussing with healthcare. They had initially had a requirement that we recognize timestamp as a crucial element of the functional model, and there's been back and forth discussion on exactly what is the right terminology here, and we settled on accountability. So we identified it as a gap or as something that we need to work upon for the next version. And federation, again, if you look at the right column, the rightmost column, the source identifies who has actually provided this feedback, right? The first one, again, is from the healthcare committee. The next three items have been brought up by the security committee itself, and the last one has been brought up by Anne Robbins, who actually is also part of security committee. Items like federation, I think probably federation is not captured in the functional model, but it should be. We need to do that. Provenance similarly has been brought up as to whether it probably needs to be mentioned in the functional model, but it definitely needs a discussion, right? The concept of provenance. Data tagging, data marking, these again are also items which have been brought up, and the question is, how do we identify this? Where do we actually talk about data tagging or data marking? I think most of them have to do with, if my understanding is correct, privacy and other aspects. So that's another item. And the human user representation, I think this is the point that you were trying to make, Anne, which is how do we look at the functional model from a user perspective, end user perspective. So I think this is a valuable input that we definitely need to start looking into, and we already have a document for that called the Minority Report. So that's one more item that we see that it's pending. So effectively, what's being shown on this slide is a change that will go into the 1.0 version of the functional model document. Any questions? Hey, Jeremy.
So just following up on, I think, the conversation a lot of folks have had, including what Jamie had just mentioned before, keep in mind this is a version 1 to support version 1 of an identity ecosystem framework, which is what we've all scoped out in the strategic plan that this group needs to tackle. This is a big, hairy problem that we're trying to solve with internet identity. There's a lot of things that we probably won't get perfect in version 1 of the framework, but if there's consensus that we're moving in the right direction, moving toward that state of the perfect, let's adopt something, move on, continue to iterate on it. We'll learn a lot more about what is needed, I think, by starting to approve an initial version, starting to work with it. That will probably do more than anything else to actually help tease out where we need to drive further improvements.
Yep. Yes, Stuart.
I want to be sure I understand this. So this appendix is being offered up as an amendment to the work product, and therefore, becomes a part of the work product that we're going to be voting on.
Yes.
That's correct. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, well, two things. First of all, I can't say I really understand why. I mean, this is basically an issues list or intentions list. It's kind of like a work plan going forward. You're basically saying, well, this is stuff that the committee considers to be on its plate with respect to further work on the functional model. It's not clear to me why you would necessarily want or need to make that a formal amendment to the work product itself. And that raises the larger process question in my mind of how we're going to deal with amendments vis-a-vis the privacy review process. Because the privacy review report, concerns a specific target, if you will. There's a specific thing that we reviewed, and that review report applies to that thing. As soon as you start engaging in amendments as part of the plenary approval process, you are effectively changing the document that was reviewed. And maybe those changes have no ramifications from a privacy standpoint, but maybe they might have ramifications. And so I think at a minimum, we're going to have some discussions about how we're going to deal with this notion of amendments with respect to the privacy review process, because I think it does pose some potential complications where the work product that is up for approval ends up being different from the work product that was reviewed.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the heart of some of the questions that Kathy Tilton has brought forward before, that there needs to be some clarifications in the workflow process that currently is referenced primarily in our rules of association, that the iterative nature of these items don't have really clear processes. And so I think we'll take that piece of it for future consideration. The way that this is laid out, we will be asking for an approval of an amendment and a secondary amendment from the Healthcare Committee, and then we will be focusing on getting consensus to approve the entire document with the approved amendments.
Sorry, I'm a little out of sync with the broadcast.
So I think the chair should address.
Hold on one second, I'm sorry.
Are you saying that, I agree with Stuart, by the way. I don't think tagging on to the end of the document is the right way to go about this, personally. I guess and I don't know if this was our occasion, it sounds like it, to discuss how a minority approach can go forward, but it sounds like it may be. I would like to continue to develop this minority aspect along with whomever else might be interested, and to interleave it in some useful way into the work products going forward. I think that it will provide a certain kind of counterbalance to what's being developed, and I think that would make more sense than making it in an appendix where it's not clear what's intended here, and along with other things that haven't been discussed at all. I'd like some, clarity on that. I would like to continue to develop this question of the human user along with others that are interested in this and voice those concerns.
Thank you, Ann. And as it says in the appendix, is that the Security Committee determined that it was the human user representation in the minority report was out of scope for the current functional model. And so it's not being appended at all to the actual functional model, but that the committee intends to further discuss how to best represent the end user. So exactly what you're saying, to continue that conversation, to figure out how to incorporate that into either future versions or a separate work product in itself. But right now, it actually is saying that the security committee had deemed it out of scope.
So just a quick follow-up on that. So are you saying that there will be a conversation within the security committee or a subgroup or something to discuss this? That's one question I'm having.
Yes, just as the security committee offered for you to present the minority report to the security committee, that conversation will continue within the security committee.
Okay, but to Tom Sullivan's point, sorry.
Who is actually the next speaker. So go ahead with your...
To Tom, can I just do it while we're here?
Yeah, go right ahead right now.
Thank you. So to Tom Sullivan's point, is that really wholly within the security committee's purview? At some point, isn't that a plenary-wide issue? And that's one question I have. And the other is, it's not about representation. It's about agency, human user agency. Without agency, representation is pretty meaningless, in my view.
Right. So I'll respond to the first part. While a work product has not been approved by the plenary, it remains a work product of that committee. Once the work product has been approved, then it is saying that we are approving it as the organization's document, not just all of the different work products that a committee could be working on. So at this point, it still is within the security committee. What gets approved will be the document that has been submitted, and then that document will be owned by the broader organization. If you understand the difference in that context. And hopefully I made that clear. So
I do understand that. I just note that I've had a great deal... Sorry, I'm out of sync with the thing. I can't tell when you're done speaking. That I've had a great deal of difficulty raising this issue within the security committee. And you know, there's a lot of issues on the table, but I would like there to be a more orderly way for this investigation as to human user agency to go forward, rather. So there needs to be a viable place for it.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Kim, Adam here.
Hi, Adam. Is it specifically to that comment? Because we do have a few people.
Yes, I feel it needs to be responded to.
Okay, go right ahead.
Just very quickly, and not to go back and forth, I just don't agree that you've had a lot of issues in raising in the security committee. You have had plenty. There have been plenty of opportunities to discuss it. The security committee deemed by consensus that it wasn't appropriate to include that, or there was an agreement to include that. So I just feel it's appropriate that everybody understands that. Thank you.
Okay, and so we do have Dr. Tom Sullivan.
We always can improve on how we communicate, as far as I can tell. And just a legitimate place. This is a legitimate issue. So maybe a subcommittee would be great, but I'll refer that back.
Okay, thank you. We actually need to go to the next speaker who has a question.
So again, Tom Sullivan, Healthcare, and this is precisely the reason I brought up who owns the document at what time. My suggestion, at least from my experience, and there are lots of us who have experience with SDOs and policy organizations, once a work product is put on the floor of the deliberating body, it is owned by the deliberating body and no longer by the committee, even if it's not approved. That's my suggestion. If you say it's still owned by the committee that originates it, that's fine, but my experience is when you open it up to debate for a vote, the work product is owned by the plenary or the debating organization, whether it gets approved or not. And then once the vote takes place, then the leadership decides where to go after that. That's my recommendation, but it's owned by the... Now if a privacy person gets up and says this is not consistent with what the changes, we didn't have time to deliberate it, the final common pathway is what gets voted upon, what are the amendments, and how do you deal with them? and then it gets delivered to the leadership who decides how to go to the next step. And so in my opinion, the plenary owns it once the debate is opened, and every committee has the right to say, we didn't have a chance to discuss this, so we did, and then blah, 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 and you take a vote.
Right. Right now, the one workflow process that we have at hand is our rules of association, whether it has gaps in it or it needs to have amendments, which is one of the reasons why we are going down the path of making amendments to the rules of association. But currently, we are only following the process that's outlined in that document. I think the recommendations are wonderful and that we can definitely take those into consideration for further modifications.
Hi, Kim. Jim Zock. I would offer that as an endorsement to what Stuart said earlier, it would be more advisable, I believe, to strike Appendix A at this juncture. It is a work plan. It should not be put to the document because it hasn't been part of the deliberations up to now. So to add a significant body of work, much of which is undefined at this point, let's stay with the defined product that you have as version 1.0, and I'm cool with that. And now, if you want to say separately, this is the work plan going forward, that's fine too, but don't put it in the document at this point because of the volume and the type of the content that people in the committees have not yet deliberated. Thank you.
Thank you. And there actually will be a formal vote for a motion on that portion of it, and so people can vote yay, up or down on that piece. Kathy?
Hi, Kathy Tilton. I'm going to take a slightly different position than what Tom just talked about, and that is in many and this is all coming from the standards body background, but in ISO and ANSI and Insights, typically when a standard is approved, it certainly does become the ownership of the parent organization. For example, an ISO standard will be ISO 4291 or whatever, it becomes that. But then there is also the maintenance organization of that document, and the maintenance organization is generally the committee or working group that that generated it in the first place. And I think that may be what you were getting to, Kim.
Yes.
In terms of you know, future revisions of that document so if version 1 was approved, then you know, that originating organization may immediately start working on version 2, or there may be a 5-year review process in where it's kicked back to that maintenance organization, and they decided to either confirm, withdraw, or revise the document based on that review period.
Thank you. And while that too has been my experience, it does sound like within the room there are different, you know, experiences that people have had. So again, as we make revisions to the workflow process, to the rules of association, all of your feedback is going to be really valuable. But right now, the workflow process as defined within the rules of association is pretty generic, and another reason why we need to make more enhancements to it. I don't have any online comments that I'm aware of. Okay, no more comments at this point.